Welcome to Whatever Happened to Pizza at McDonald's, the investigative journalism program, or IJP, where I ask the question, Whatever happened to the pizza at McDonald's? A proud part of the Panoply Network, a wholly owned subsidiary of Pizzaply Media. I'm your host, Brian Thompson, investigative journalist. It has been some time since the publication of an episode of this program, and I feel I owe it to you, the listeners, to explain the delay. Please be warned, however, that the reasons have to do with the physical health of my bodily person, and therefore are, rather by definition, personal. If one of your New Year's resolutions for the year 2024 is to set firmer boundaries in your parasocial relationships with people you do not really know, such as podcast hosts, etc., then I suggest you not listen to these personal details about my bodily health. With that warning warned, I will now tell my tale. It all started on New Year's Eve. As a recent relocator to the city of New York City, New York, I was tempted to spend New Year's Eve in Times Square, watching a bejeweled ball slowly descend to its ball base, along with thousands of my fellow New Yorkies. I am typically loath to insert myself into large crowds, for fear an assassin might take advantage of the chaos to surreptitiously inject my jugular vein with radioactive paste, and or for fear that a stranger's hand might brush against a sensitive area, such as one or more of my buttocks. But New Year's Eve in Times Square is somewhat of a rite of passage for the New Yorkie. In fact, it is literally so, as children born in the city are forced to attend this ceremony upon reaching the age of 4. If they make it out without being trampled to death, they are welcomed back into society as legal adults. If they do not, then locals consider the loss a sad but necessary pruning of their family trees. However, I am not a native New Yorkie. I am also already a legal adult, having achieved that status via the coming-of-age ritual practiced by my native peoples, namely getting kicked out of the orphanage. Plus, in addition to other dangers, I was afraid if I attended the Times Square New Year's Eve ceremony by myself, I might end up standing beside another unaccompanied person who would see fit to kiss me upon the stroke of midnight. As a strict, devout, and some might even say fanatical devotee of the Christian faith, this would not be an acceptable circumstance, as I would then have to enter into a marriage contract with the kisser, lest we both burn forever in the fires of hell. As someone who considers himself to be in a rather devoted relationship with his work, I simply do not have room in my schedule for a wife/husband/non-binary spouse. So, choosing not to attend the Times Square ceremony, I had to find somewhere else to metaphorically ring in the literal new year. My own apartment/headquarters was out of the question, as I was sure any outbursts of cheering throughout the city at the stroke of midnight would arouse the rats enough to come bursting through my windows in search of shelter. And despite the fact that the city of New York City is sometimes called the city that never sleeps, it is surprisingly difficult to find a public establishment that is open at such a late hour. Apparently, the global COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic forced many all-night automats, dinner counters, and diner cars to either close completely or drastically reduce their operating hours. And most of the eateries that are still open all night have made it clear that I am not welcome back, after asking what they claim to be a harassment-level number of questions about how quickly they might be able to bake a pizza. For the record, I dispute these claims. The sheer number of such questions I ask is actually quite small, though I do admit to asking them in the firm, loud, and forceful tone of voice known as the journalist's holler. Thankfully, there is one all-night New York business to which I am still granted access: the 24-hour Apple Store on Fifth Avenue. Situated at the southeast corner of one of New York's most central parks, the Fifth Avenue Apple Store is an underground bunker topped with a glowing glass cube. I decided to celebrate the new year at this location. While I do not own any Apple brand computers, I do enjoy fidgeting with display models, of which this store has quite a few. I find it calms and focuses my mind to wander from natural wood veneer table to natural wood veneer table, touching screens, clicking keys, and flipping lids. And perhaps this is a vice best left unspoken, but I also enjoy the sense of power it gives me to repeatedly tell store associates that no, I am not interested in purchasing anything. Plus, being located in a subterranean bunker, the Fifth Avenue Apple Store would most likely be relatively safe in the event that the bejeweled ball in Times Square were to lose control of its descent regulators and come crashing down to its ball base, flinging razor-sharp crystal chunks all over the island of Manhattan Island. However, that night I made what turned out to be a nearly fatal mistake. As I walked to the Fifth Avenue Apple Store, I patronized one of the city's famous hot dog stands. In fact, this stand was so famous that the word famous is in the very name, namely, Nathan's Famous Hot Dogs. As a safety precaution, I finished eating said hot dog before entering the store. I saw no signs posted prohibiting the carrying of hot dogs or any other food, but as I mentioned A4, one descends into the Fifth Avenue Apple Store bunker via an aforementioned spiral staircase. I was afraid if I were in the process of consuming my hot dog while descending said stairs, I might become overwhelmed by a bout of dizziness, drop my hot dog, slip on the spilled pickle relish, and tumble down the stairs to my death. But even though I masticated the entire wiener from tip to tip before entering the store, I failed to realize until too late that I had neglected to take any of Nathan's famous napkins from the Nathan's Famous hot dog stand. Thus, my fingers, palms, wrists, lips, infranasal depression, and much of my forearms were somewhat caked with a mixture of wiener juice, mustard smears, and relish leavings. I tried as best I could to keep the store's screens and keyboards clean as I fidgeted with them, but the only method I could use to wash my epidermis was via tongue bath. In other words, I was forced to treat my phalanges to a vigorous series of licks and sucks. Due to a combination of this self-cleaning method and the fact that the Apple Corporation apparently does not take in-store hygiene seriously enough to disinfect all surfaces and buttons that are available for the public with which to fidget, I came down with a quite severe illness. I suppose it could have been worse. If my mouth were not so caked in hot dog refuse, there is a chance I could have been kissed by a fellow customer at the stroke of midnight, subjecting myself to any number of KTDs. But whatever I caught from touching iPad minis and licking my fingers was plenty unpleasant enough. I spent New Year's week confined mostly to my bed. Occasionally, I would walk to my door to retrieve sacks of supplies delivered by gig workers, and every now and then I would gather enough strength to complete my bathroom business in the actual bathroom. But for the majority of those 7 days, I remained bundled up in my bundles in a cold sweat. It is no one's business, of course, but I am pleased to report the COVID-19 coronavirus tests I took were all negative. However, I am less pleased to report there are still many other diseases extant in the world, and many of them are quite nasty. After 3 days of suffering from a fever over 103 degrees Fahrenheit, I decided it might be prudent to consult a medical professional. So I Googled.com'd several variations of the phrase, "What do medical professionals have to say about people with high fevers lasting more than 3 days?" But I am afraid all the results were useless search engine optimization fodder, such as pop-up ridden listicles with titles like Top 10 TikTokers Who Died of Scarlet Fever. Out of sheer desperation, I called my medical insurance company to look for the closest in-network doctor who makes house calls and also might be willing to pick up a hot dog at Nathan's Famous on the way to my house. I will not mention the name of the insurance company. I will only state that they are quite reputable and that their mascot is a cartoon military officer with a bushy white mustache. They politely informed me that hiring an in-person doctor would cost them more than they were willing to spend to potentially save my life, and instead they suggested I schedule a telephone conference via a service called the CVS Minute Clinic. The advantages, they explained, were threefold. Fold number one, they would not have to pay anything, and in fact, they would turn a profit on the transaction since CVS pays them a finder's fee. Fold number two, I could be virtually seen much more quickly than I could be literally seen. And fold number three, by speaking to a medical mystifier over the phone, I would not run the risk of receiving a house call from some kind of sadist like podcast star Dr. Death or newspaper star Dr. Kevorkian. However, I was given some pause by their description of this virtual doctor as a, quote, medical mystifier, unquote. But they just explained this wording was legally required since CVS could not guarantee the person I would be calling has a medical degree or any kind of medical education or is not, in fact, a magician. By this point, my brain had been almost literally boiling for over 62 hours. Plus, I could not metaphorically turn up my literal nose at the low cost of this virtual doctor's appointment. If I had ordered a real doctor, I would have had to take out another loan against my priceless McDonald's Pizza Artifacts collection. But a 15-minute telephone call through the CVS Minute Clinic only cost a nominal copay of $600. When I called the CVS Minute Clinic, I was supposed to be connected via video conference with one of their medical mystifiers. However, the mystifier to whom I was assigned pretended not to be able to figure out how to make her video work. This was obviously a lie, but unlike a harmful black lie, such as the lie that McDonald's stopped serving pizza because it took too long to make, this was a harmless white lie, most likely explained by a simple bad hair day. But while I was able to forgive this falsehood on the part of the mystifier, I had a more difficult time forgiving the rather useless advice I was given regarding my illness. I described my symptoms and was told I was most likely suffering from a strain of the influenza virus. This is a common virus, communicable in myriad ways, including inhaling an infected person's bodily droplets and licking relish juice off of one's fingers after clicking a magic mouse. However, I am no stranger to illnesses. I have suffered from common colds, caused by not wearing a warm enough coat while digging through the snows of Alaska in search of McDonald's pizza evidence, and I have suffered from the COVID-19 coronavirus, caused by attending a too-crowded Sugar Ray concert during the height of the pandemic. And I have even suffered from a near-fatal case of Burkitt lymphoma, which my oncologist claims was most likely the result of a previously unknown infection with the Epstein-Barr virus, but which my legal team advises me not to say may have been injected into my lymph nodes by agents working on behalf of the McDonald's Corporation. And yes, of course, I am no stranger to influenza. However, I was rather concerned about the amount of time I had been testing positive for high fever, and I relayed this information to my mystifier. In response, she stated that having a fever means I am sick, and that fever is, in fact, a fairly common bodily response to sickness. I told her I understood this, having done my due diligence before the call and looked up the word fever in the Merriam-Webster dictionary. I restated that my concern had to do with the rather lengthy period of time in which my brain, guts, organs, etc. had been subjected to this kind of high temperature. I could not help but think of previous instances in which my fellow journalists have been irrevocably harmed by sustained high body temperatures. For example, my colleague Laura Logan was once chief foreign affairs correspondent for CBS News, but now she spends her time spreading anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about how the Rothschild family engineered the American Civil War. The consensus among my fellow news hounds is that she suffered quite a bit of brain damage after falling asleep in an Iraqi desert without wearing a big enough hat. My Mystifier went on to say I had nothing to worry about, and that a high fever just means there is something wrong with me. She went on to inform me she would give me a prescription for nasal decongestant spray, which I could pick up at my local CVS for a nominal fee. I asked her how much she was getting paid in finder's fee for sending me to CVS, but apparently she was unable to hear me as she was driving through a tunnel. So then I asked if this nasal decongestant spray would do anything for my fever. She said it would not, but it would decongest my nays. I replied that my nays was not very congested at all, and that I would really like instead to receive some sort of advice or medication vis-a-vis my alarmingly high and long-lasting fever. At which point, an operator broke in to inform me that in order to continue for another 15 minutes, I would have to insert $99 worth of quarters. Frankly, I did not have $99 worth of quarters, nor was I using a telephone with any kind of coin slot. In fact, I am fairly sure no such consumer telephones exist. I did not see a single one at the Fifth Avenue Apple Store, and I believe I fondled all of them. But thankfully, even though I received almost no help whatsoever from the CVS Minute Clinic medical mystifier, my fever did eventually go down after just several more days. I do not remember some of these days, and I remember others quite vividly, though I now suspect some of these memories are of fever-induced hallucinations and are therefore non-canon. Though I suppose it is possible a moon goblin from Europa did in fact teleport into my bedroom, bite me with his poison fangs, and agree to share the antidote only if I bested him in a 7-game tournament of Chinese checkers. But as I am clearly still alive, that would mean that I did defeat the goblin at Chinese checkers, which I find somewhat unlikely considering I do not know the rules. But regardless, I would just like to lodge a complaint about CVS Minute Clinic. I do not believe I received the care to which I was entitled, and I am also still somewhat annoyed that instead of being connected with a doctor, I was forced to speak with a medical mystifier. If real doctors are simply too expensive, I believe you could split the difference, and perhaps the medical mystifiers could still be used as long as they can pass a high school biology test. That is just a suggestion. Anyway, that is my complaint, and once again, my name is Brian Thompson.
I'm sorry?
I said I would like to lodge a complaint against the CVS Minute Clinic.
This is McDonald's.
Oh, this is McDonald's? I thought I had called the Centers for Disease Control. I'm sorry, I must have called the wrong number.
Okay. All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye. Do you know what happened to pizza at McDonald's? Do you remember it? Please send all correspondence to pizza@mcdonalds@gmail.com. To support the show, please join my Patreon at patreon.com/pizza@mcd's for exclusive benefits. And for more information, including links to social media, merchandise opportunities, etc., visit pizza@mcdonalds.com. Thank you to my invaluable Patreon producers: Bipolar Biped, Grant Bacon, Jacob Ford, Joe Kajik, Kimberly King, Kyle Turok, Pam Gabriel, Polly Egan, Thomas Young, Trisha Yates, Will, Adam Crump, Andrew Duffy, Andrew Ahmed Rubin, Billy Jean, Brad Allen Thompson, Creighton Barrow, Dan Dreyer, Gerald Lewis, Jeffrey Francis Silva, Jay Poop, Calvin Thomas, Laurel Paul, Opus Moreski, Paul Fu, and Ryan Guggenmoss. I'm Brian Thompson, investigative journalist.